we are going to take just a very brief overview here of drafting applications. You can take entire classes on how to draft entire patent applications. What I'm going to do here is give you my flow of what I go through when I draft a patent application, because I'll give you some way or some frame of context as to how it is that you can approach it as well. Step number one is to finalize the claims. And so usually what I do is when I have an invention or inventor disclosure, I usually get at least one independent claim that I present to the inventor to make sure that what I see as new and novel coincides with what the inventor sees as new and novel as well. So I usually can then come back and I look at the claim, I make any adjustments as needed, refining the claim language more. I will then complete an entire claim set where I flesh out the claims, meaning that I add on dependent claims, and I create counterpart analogous claims. So if I start with a method claim, I might have a system claim or a hardware claim. And I also, let's say if we're dealing with software, I might have a computer process type claim as well. If it's more mechanical in nature, I usually will have some method of using or producing or making whatever it is that is intended, and I also have a mechanical, more system claim set as well that coincides with the actual mechanics of whatever it is that has been invented. So I get an entire claim set, and once I have my entire claim set, that allows me a basis to know where it is that I'm going. So, and not only that, but in my mind, some patent practitioners like to draft the entire specification first, and then they go back and draft their claim set, because they say by that time it's really firmed up in their mind as to what the invention is. And I can understand that, because sometimes it's at the end of writing a patent application that you finally say, oh, that's what they were meaning. But more often than not, I find that starts me out on a page where I am not 100% clear as to what is novel about the invention, which means that I'm then fishing around in the specification all the way until the end, where I then create my claim set to really show what is novel. If I start with the claims, I start with a point of novelty, which then gives me a frame of context to approach the rest of the specification from that point of novelty, and making sure that that is very much clear in what it is that I write in the specification. So I draft my claims first. I then flesh out the invention in my mind by drafting the figures. So I think through the claims to get a sense as to what the invention is, how it is composed, the potential alternative embodiments. Everything gets into either the independent claim or the dependent claims. I then double back with the figures, because the figures help me think through the claims that I have just completed. And once I have my figures in place, the figures allow me a little bit to know what needs to be covered in the specification to adequately show what's in the claim set. So I have the claim set, I have my figures, and figures are usually done also in real time, often with the inventor. So the inventor, when you're with the inventor, they often will have some figures or diagrams. If they don't, then you can have a whiteboard and you can scribble some things down together, and you can show exactly how it is that things are arranged or composed or constructed and put together. And usually at the invention disclosure, I'm taking photos, I'm taking pictures of everything that we write together or draw together, because then when I sit down and do my figures, I already have a basis, and I simply need to replicate that using the drawing application that we already discussed. So once I have my claims done and my drawing done, then that gives me really the foundation to then attack the rest of the specification. So if we're looking at the specification, and when I say the specification includes everything. Technically speaking, the drawings are part of the specification, the claims are part of the specification. Everything that gets filed as far as that document is the specification itself. But when I go back to the detailed description and I'm filling in all the different elements of the specification, what actually goes where? So I'm in the textbook again on page, or in the section 3-31, and I'm at the very, very end of this segment there, where it says abstract. And you may say, well, why do you start at the end? And the reason why is, once I have my claims in place, I take my very first independent claim, usually it's the method claim, and I simply take the method claim and I put it into paragraph form. And that becomes my abstract. So we have an abstract that is literally based verbatim on paragraph form of the claim language itself. Now you may say, well, what's the paragraph form? Well, if the claim language is usually written in active voice, so a process comprising, or let's say the widget is attached to, by the way, that was passive, that what we do is we convert the language so that the verb comes after the subject. So, for example, let's say that we have a system comprising of a screen that displays objects, and we have a mouse that receives input. If we were to convert that to paragraph form, we say that we have here a system. Systems are provided, including a screen that is used to display, or a mouse that is used to receive. Or you can, in fact, you can even flip the subject and the verb there, so that it really is passive tense, where you can say that a system is provided for receiving information displayed on a screen. Or we can say that input is received by a mouse. So rather than saying a mouse is used to receive or a mouse receives, you can just simply say information is received by the mouse. So, and that's what I mean by converting it to paragraph form, where we're taking the active tense of the description and we're converting it into passive tense sentences and putting it into paragraph form. Now, the abstract, for all intents and purposes, will be exactly the same as another section, the summary. The USPTO often says, well, they should be different. And technically, they should be different. But the reality is that when all is said and done, the summary literally is exactly the same as the abstract. So for purposes of simplifying what it is we're doing, we copy and paste from the abstract to the summary section. So we already have, at this point, 3 sections done: the claims, the summary, and the abstract. Now, when we go down to the rest of the sections, let's walk it through. So the title can really just be a straightforward apparatus for something, or computer program products for, or a system method and computer products for, and it's just a very straight little line. Field of the invention, you can see that that is just a one sentence that says the present invention generally relates to, and you give the entire field of what it is that it's relating to. So if we're dealing with camera type technology, you can say the present invention generally relates to camera technology and has a certain specific application to lens capture systems, or whatever it is that it relates to that's a particular nuance of the entire field. In the background section, I would say keep it very, very brief. It does not need to be elaborated on, and one of the reasons why you do not want to elaborate is because whatever you put into that background section will be construed in a court of law as an admission. Let me repeat that. Anything you put into the background section will be construed as an admission. There was a patent a few years ago where in the background section they were setting the context and saying, well, this particular patent that came before taught this, this particular patent taught this particular patent taught this. If you went through all these things, then what ended up occurring was that the court came back and said, you know what? It's an admission on file that this, in fact, is prior art to the present invention. And they actually invalidated the patent based off of the admission within the background section. Now, that may not necessarily be clear to you, but the big takeaway I want you to have is simply that what you put into the background section is an admission, so be very careful what you put into the background section. It needs to be just very high level, what the problem is that an inventor was facing. So if we're dealing with camera technology, you may say, it is generally known that capture systems can operate at a very slow rate. And a slow rate may cause blurry images, may cause a decrease in battery power, etc., etc. And in view of this, there is a need to rectify the issue. So what you're doing in the background section is not necessarily giving all the prior art that you are aware of. That is what the IDS is for. The background section is for you to give the context of where it is the inventor was coming from. And that is where you can really present the issue that is often plagued and how that sets the stage to rectify the issue by the present invention. The summary, as we already discussed, is the same as the abstract. The brief description of the drawings is exactly that. So it is figure 1 illustrates a camera apparatus or a system for receiving data. It doesn't need to be elaborated on in detail. It's at a very high level what is being illustrated in the drawing itself. So you simply, and this is where you include a listing of all of the drawings. And it is just a very quick one sentence as far as what is being shown by the drawing. Then we get to the detailed description. And the detailed description is where we really have the nuts and bolts of most of the discussion relating to the invention itself. Now, I indicated previously that when we went from the claim section to the abstract and the summary, we took the contents of the independent claim and converted that to paragraph form. Took that which was active, put it into passive form, put it into separate sentences, and strung it all together into a paragraph form. When we get down to the detailed description, one of the very first things that I do is I take now the converted paragraph that we already did, so the summary or the abstract, and then I take all of the dependent claims and I take off the claim part where it says the apparatus of claim 1 wherein. I take that off, so I just have the limitation, and I convert the limitation over into passive voice in paragraph form. So now if I have 10 dependent claims, I convert each of those 10 dependent claims into just a regular sentence. And the key is we are modifying just the verb from an active voice to a passive voice so that the language is modified as little as possible. We want the language to be as verbatim from the claims in the specification as possible. So I take my dependent claims and I group them by relative overlapping subject matter. So if I have claims 1 through 5, or rather 2 through 5, that let's say deal with the lens specific, and I have claims 6 through 10 that talk about the processing of what hits the image processor, I would group 6 to 10 together and 2 through 5 together. And then when I'm discussing the claim, when I'm discussing the independent claim within the detailed description, you may be saying, well, how do we introduce everything together? And that is where the figures come into place. So we generally will have a figure that corresponds with our claim. And so let's say that our claim is broken down into 3 different parts. And so the first part may be element, let's say 102, and the second one may be element 104, the last element may be 106. And then when you're describing this, you have all these paragraph forms of the claims themselves, and then you just simply say, let's say that we take our part of the independent claim that's now in paragraph form that corresponds with item 102. You would say, as shown in item 102 or component 102, blah, 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 blah. And then after that, let's say that related to our lens. We can say, for example, and then we simply move forward all of our dependent claims that give further clarification as to how it is that lens assembly may in fact occur. So what we're doing is we're grouping the dependent claims to the particular limitation within the independent claim that it is relevant to. So when we introduce that particular independent limitation from the independent claim, we would then have a clarifying sentence or two or paragraphs that follow that are the dependent claims in paragraph form that flesh out that topic. So that may have been a little confusing. Let me describe it in a different way. So let's say that we have in our claim limitation again, let's say that it's about our claim relates to a bicycle, and we have a limitation that talks about the handlebars. And in our dependent claim, we say, well, the handlebars may be constructed of metal or of rubber or of some other composite material. And then you may say, wherein the handlebars are made from a carbon nanotube material. And we may have another dependent claim that says, wherein the handlebars are of a stiff material or of a bendable material. Let's say that we want a bendable handlebars. We take all these dependent claims, and when we get to our detailed description, let's assume that we have a figure that has an element 102 that talks about the handlebars. So we introduce and we say, as shown in component 102, the handlebar is attached to the bicycle. And not only, and then you can follow with an additional paragraph that simply says, additionally, the handlebar may include or may be constructed of metal. And this is where you then put in those dependent claims. So the handlebar may be constructed of metal, rubber, or some composite material. Further, the handlebars may be constructed of a rigid or usually is what you put, or a bendable material. So this is simply where if we have introduced the concept of having a handlebar within our independent claim, then when we introduce handlebar 102 within the detailed description, we just simply tack on in paragraph form all the dependent claims that relate to that particular element. Now, after you have that that structure in place, namely that the dependent claims have gone into the dependent claims have been arranged and coordinated with the subject matter that it relates to within the independent claim limitation, then you can go in and fill in any gaps. So let's say that we have introduced this concept of a handlebar, and the claims have specified and gone through exactly the material that it may include. Well, one of the things that you may not necessarily have covered in the dependent claims is the heat resistance of the material that is used. So you might want to have a paragraph talking about the heat resistance of it, or the durability, or any other information that the inventor may have given you that relates to the handlebars themselves. So in short, after we have our structure in place, namely dependent claims and independent claims have been incorporated within the detailed description, then that allows you a framework where you can start filling in gaps and filling in additional information based off what it is the inventor has provided to you. After you've done that, after you have what's called your broad embodiment section, and that is the broad embodiment is exactly what it is that we just went through, namely where you introduce your independent claims and you also put your dependent claims into this section. Then usually what follows your broad embodiment, and the broad embodiment, all that means is that it's a figure that corresponds with your independent claim. So once you have the broad embodiment in place, then you have what's called other embodiments. And that's all the different arrangements and other configurations of the invention itself. And for that, we already have our claim sets incorporated. So it simply comes down to describing what is shown in the figure. And so you may need to have the components broken down as needed to be able to adequately describe it within the specification. But the idea is that we focus first on the broad embodiment and then the alternative embodiments thereafter. And you may be saying, well, why do we even need a broad embodiment? The broad embodiment is there, one, to make it as clear upfront as possible as to what the invention is and from the point of novelty. And if we start with the claims as the basis for our discussion, namely the basis from which we in fact do all of our other work, then it would make sense that if we are starting with the claims, we really are starting with what we feel is the point of novelty here. And that helps direct not only the attention of the application, but the attention of the examiner. When they dig in, the very first thing that they see and they read relates to the claim section, which inherently should be that which is the most novel aspect, or that which we are viewing as the most novel aspect. The second, and I would say the primary reason why it is you want a broad embodiment, is for the individual that ultimately will be deciding the fate of the patent. which is the jury member. So let's say that you have a very complex, there was a few years ago a case where I sat in on the entire patent infringement case in the court of law, and it was very complex. The claim was very hard to read. It was dealing with wireless protocols of sending, processing encrypted information from one system to another system. And most of the people on the jury panel, many of them didn't even have a computer. And most of them, their extent of understanding computers included pressing it on and turning it off. And suddenly they were forced to be the ultimate judge as to the validity of this patent, of this extremely complex type of technology. That can be very hard to do, and especially if you start with the very complex diagram or overview of the invention, you may lose the jury members immediately. And if you have a broad embodiment that takes what you feel is really the focus of the novelty, and you have it both in figure form and in the corresponding broad embodiment form in the detailed description, then that allows you to have, let's say, a more clear basis that you can stand before the jury and say, you know what, jury members, this invention fundamentally comes down to just 3 things. And it allows you to succinctly present the invention in a manner that anyone, including all jury members, can actually understand. So this arrangement of getting the broad embodiment in there first ultimately is for the jury members so that they can really understand at a high level what is going on. So they have a frame of context where they can go through all the other alternative embodiments, all of your other figures, and all your other descriptions within the frame of context of what it is that you have described in relation to the very first figure, which corresponds also with what it is that you've claimed within your claim language as well. So at a high level, that is kind of an overview of the entire application drafting section. As I've indicated, you can spend an entire course on application drafting. To recap what it is that we've done, start with your claims, go to your figures, then go to creating the abstract and summary, and then you start filling in what I call some of the miscellaneous information. The title, don't forget your priority section, if it is applicable. The background section, again, keep it very high level what the issue is that's being presented. Then you get to your detailed description section, and that is where you take all your claims in paragraph form, insert them, correlate them with the numbering that is found within your broad embodiment figure within the figure section itself. And then that puts you in a position where you can then follow up with all the other figures to describe everything else. So, like many things, you probably will not fully understand how to draft a patent application until you sit down and do one. But hopefully this gives you a little frame of context as to how to approach it so you have a streamline of what to do once you actually start with your mentor.